Hey everyone. Okay, so today's video discussion is going to be on the PACT Act, the VA Department of Veterans Affairs PACT Act, and more importantly, various systemic situations and factors that the PACT Act is insufficient in covering right now. And this pertains directly to me. When it comes to my military service and a toxic exposure injury that I suffered while serving in the U.S. Army. So to start, for those that don't know, the PACT Act is a new act that came into play that was approved by Congress and the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide further comprehensive medical care, diagnostics, studies, testing, service, and compensation in a bundled package for service members who have suffered toxic exposure injuries in the military. This is mostly pertaining to the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, so from 2001 to present. The biggest issue with the PACT Act is that it's really only covering a couple of toxic exposure injuries, namely water contamination and burn pits, airborne hazards, toxic exposures. There's a couple of other things in there, but it's not nearly as broad spectrum coverage as it needs to be. I don't really like getting political in my videos. I don't like politics in general. Obviously, this day and age, you have to pay attention to stuff, and obviously I'm concerned about a lot of things, and I pay attention to a lot of stuff. But with this in particular, it is very important. It's a very important topic, and it affects a lot of people who have served in the military over the past 22 years, give or take. So, there are some things with the PACT Act, like I said, that are not being fully covered and being a full spectrum acknowledgement and coverage of verified toxic exposure injuries. Let me talk about mine here real quick. Let me get a drink real quick. So, I was still in infantry school on Sand Hill in Fort Benning, Georgia when my toxic exposure happened. I went to Troop Medical Center 7. It's TMC 7. It's near, it's right across the road from the rec center on Sand Hill. And right across from my training battalion, 219. 2nd Battalion, 19th Infantry Regiment. It was say just up the hill on the other side of the road was that 254, and then down a ways were a couple of other units, and then just kind of down and around the road was the brigade headquarters for the 2nd Battalion, 2nd Brigade, and 2nd Battalion training companies. I had pulled staff duty there a couple times, but I had gone to TMC 7 right across the road from our battalion and our company training center and stuff over at 219. I went across the road to TMC 7 because I was having really bad migraines, and it just, I was just gonna get some fucking Motrin and deal with it, but I got pulled aside, and the chief nurse, a sergeant, and I forget her name, maybe Smith, I don't know. A lot of those people seem to have the last name Smith. I don't know if that was coincidence or if everyone was just using like fake names on their name tags, but the chief sergeant, staff sergeant nurse pulled me aside into a room and gave me an injection. I couldn't tell what it was from. It was from a small unmarked bottle, and she said, and I remember the words explicitly, "If you feel worse in the next 24 hours, go to the hospital." Which really kind of raised some questions with me, like, why would I not just come right back here if it was something that you gave me and you would know how to deal with it before having to go to the hospital. I just found that strange. Not even 10 hours later, we were going to rack out, and I was feeling weird. The next morning, lights on, you know, reveille, waking up, I couldn't get out of bed. I had 105-degree fever, and was seized up almost. My body was seized up. And complete lucidity. It was hard for me to understand where I was. It was really bad. I did not know what was going on. I ended up getting carried to an ambulance and taken to Martin Army Hospital on Fort Benning. The main main hospital, Army hospital there. Get in the ER. I remember the ER doctor. He was an interesting guy. Had a good sense of humor. He's like, "Sorry if my breath smells like coffee and hash." And I was like, you know, half out of him, like, "What?" He's like, "It was a joke. Never mind." And they asked me, like, "What'd you take?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What'd you guys give me over at TMC7? What did you give me?" And that started a long road of people just freaking out, not knowing what was going on. And you know, obviously they're off other places asking questions and stuff. But my temperature reached 107. And I was in and out of consciousness. And yeah, it was bad. It was bad. I ended up, I woke up at one point and I was in an ice bath in a room. I was in an ice bath. That was the only way that we were able to cool my body down. And this went on for a couple of days. At one point, I guess my heart had stopped for almost a minute. But I came to probably 2 days later. This was like November, I'm going to say like 19th or 20th in 2005. And I came to a couple of days later. Yeah, at that point it was like the 22nd or something like that. And I was surrounded. My bed was surrounded by all these high-ranking officer doctors. I mean, we're captains, majors, colonels, lieutenant colonels, all standing around me, super concerned, like looking at me, like what, you know, trying to figure out what was happening. And I come to, and I just asked them all flat out. I'm like, "Sirs, ma'ams, what happened? What did you give me? What happened?" And they're like, "We don't know." So that was the start. That was my toxic exposure, and down the line, you know, it was fine for a while. You know, I was doing the Army thing, and you know, doing my training, deployments, all that stuff, and then I got out of the military, and just slowly, you know, year after year, my condition was just getting, and I was still working, I was pushing, I was contracting, I was doing executive protection, I was doing all this stuff. And it got to the point where I was actually going to the VA emergency room fairly often, because I would eat something and all of a sudden I'm puking blood. And like all this other crazy shit is happening. So this is going on for years and going down the line, and I'm just trying to mitigate it and figure out what is agreeing with me and what isn't to eat and like all this stuff. And I had been losing more weight, and went back to college. Still working, but went back to college. Got my degree in 2015, and then was still having more and more of these problems and this vomiting and illness. Eventually, the Department of Veterans Affairs sent me to the War-Related Illness and Injury Study Center, Injury and Illness Study Center, called the RISC, W-R-I-A-S-C. There's only 3 locations in the country, and it's a grant-funded, specialized department, a specialized study department within the VA. There's only 3 locations in the country. One's in East Orange, New Jersey. One's in, I think, like San Antonio, Texas. And the other one's out in California. They sent me to the East Coast one, and I was there for 4 or 5 days, just doing a battery of testing and things like that. And they found results. Total gluten intolerance, mitochondrial dysfunction, and a mild autonomic nervous imbalance. Autonomic nervous imbalance, the autonomic nervous system is basically how your brain and your organs communicate to each other. Mitochondrial dysfunction, mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell, you know, the base, one of those base cells in your body that is some of the brains to how a lot of things function in the body and things like that. So there was a dysfunction there. So, got all these findings, and that's a verified toxic exposure injury. Those are results of a toxic exposure injury. I was getting fluid around my gallbladder, and there was obvious damage to my digestive system, because now I'm completely gluten intolerant and some other stuff. You know, all these things compounded together. I had all kinds of tests done. I even got cut open at one point before going to the risk and stuff to check for some things. I had a laparoscopic surgery. They cut me open, and they took my appendix out, which I didn't have appendicitis, but they took it out anyway, which is fine. And I had a bunch of like EGDs, which is a scope down the throat and looking into your digestive system. I've had colonoscopies, like all kinds of stuff. They couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. So then I go to the risk and got these tests done. Mitochondrial dysfunction, mild autonomic nervous imbalance, and developed total gluten intolerance. Those are results, those are symptoms and permanent results from a toxic exposure injury, and I know exactly what happened. Now, what I was given to create this problem, I don't know. And this is where, getting back to it with the PACT Act, they're not full spectrum covering toxic exposure injuries that thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of service members have been exposed to. Whether some have symptoms and such, and some don't. Let me just check the camera here real quick. Whether some are showing symptoms and have injuries from these exposures or not, you know, that's on an individual basis, obviously. But I'm not the only person that's suffered these symptoms and suffered from this exposure. One of the more popular cases of this kind of thing is a guy by the name of David Fay. I can't remember if he's from Indiana or Ohio. He was a Marine, and he was getting some injections, a couple of them being the anthrax jab at the time, and it caused his body to swell and his kidneys to fail and some other horrific things to happen. These are just, you know, my examples of what happened to me, what has happened to him, because he got news coverage and stuff. This has happened to thousands, tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands of service members. It's not just airborne hazards, it's not just contaminated water, even though the conditions on being on military bases and around a lot of toxic substances is another contributing factor. Whatever I was given in the Troop Medical Center from that unmarked bottle caused permanent damage to my body. And I wasn't the only one that happened to, because I know a lot of people went through that same TMC and were given the same stuff. Now, what it was, it could have been a contaminated anthrax thing. It could have been something else experimental. This part of the whole implied consent thing back in those days in the Army and stuff, in the military, when you signed your enlistment papers and everything else. You know, it's one of those things, and you had to take the anthrax stuff and whatever else they may have been giving us. But it has come back to great detriment to the veteran population as a whole in the full spectrum of all these toxic exposures, and not just that one. But that's one that's not being covered by the PACT Act adequately, even though I have the evidence from a VA specialized, you know, clinic saying that I have these problems, that I have these medical issues. And I know there's a lot of other veterans that are dealing with the same thing, and they haven't been diagnosed and haven't had these symptoms and this testing done and these symptoms found and results found. And they're just trying to deal with it on the day-to-day as they can by changing their diet and other things. The War-Related Illness and Injury Study Center needs more funding to expand, to be able to get all these veterans in that are dealing with toxic exposures. One of the other guys, I'm not going to say names or anything, he was in the Navy, or the Air Force. He was one of the guys that painted stealth bombers. That paint, that special paint for stealth bombers, causes liver and endocrine system failure. That's why he was at the risk. All kinds of stuff like that. That's what I'm talking about here. So with the PACT Act, it's not covering everything, not nearly enough of everything. And it needs to be expanded. The war-related illness and injury study center, the risk, needs to be expanded, needs more funding so that adequate findings can be done, performed, and we can come up with solutions. We can develop solutions for this kind of thing. You know what the care protocol is for me now? I just take vitamins and I have a gluten-free diet. That's what they came up with for a solution for me. It's been okay. I'm not dealing with a lot of my symptoms, you know, because now that I'm gluten intolerant, I don't eat stuff with gluten, I feel okay. The vitamins are fine, you know, they're just vitamins. You know, everybody should be taking vitamins anyway, but that was the care plan that they came up with, instead of actually trying to do further testing and find a solution to be able to fix this. It's permanent. It is forever. And if I were to ever have kids, I don't know if any of that would get passed on to them. And I know it's a big issue in the military as well, especially those who have been in combat theaters and have had toxic exposure injuries. The rate of birth defects is pretty high. It's not good. So, yeah, I just need a minute to think about that. It's been a wild ride, and there is a lot of stuff that needs to be more adequately covered under the PACT Act and by the VA to try and fix the problem. I picked the VA that I go to now because it is it's in the top 10 of the best VAs in the country. That's one of the reasons why I chose this area, apart from having a good airport that's easy for me to travel for work and everything, and a good school. The VA is great here. Very happy with my care at this VA. Other VAs that I've been to have not been good. But this one's good. And they understand. They were the ones that pushed to get me to the risk to have these studies done and to find these very real problems. So this is, you know, huge props to them. I really appreciate them for what they do and their willingness to want to try and move forward with more care options and solutions and things like that. Okay, they're great, and I appreciate them for that. Need to check the camera again here real quick to make sure it doesn't cut off on me. It stops filming after like 23 minutes. I'm not going to edit this. I'm just going to leave all this in because it is a stream of thought, but also I don't want to edit out anything important on accident. So that's what's going on. That when it comes to the PACT Act, there needs to be just full bore, balls to the wall, full spectrum support and coverage and expansion of coverage for different exposure injuries, you know, incurred in the line of service and even subjected to us onto us by the military. That is a big thing. So anybody who finds this video that is a veteran and does have issues, health issues going on from potential toxic exposure injuries, leave a comment, but also, you know, try and understand some of the information in this video and take it back to your care provider and be like, hey, can I get into the risk? Can I go have testing done? Can you do these kinds of tests? Can we try and figure out a better way, a better care protocol so that you're not miserable, you're not losing weight, you're not, you know, on the brink of fucking death. Those are important things, and people need to talk about this. They do. They really, really do. The other thing that I'm going to bring up, it is an exceptional documentary by Dr. Gary Knoll. The documentary is called Killing Our Own: The Truth About Gulf War Syndrome, or Gulf War Illness. Killing Our Own: The Truth About Gulf War Illness, or Gulf War Syndrome. It talks about different kinds of toxic exposure injuries, from drinking water, airborne burn pits, airborne hazards, depleted uranium from munitions, the medical aspect, the substances that we were subjected to, that I and thousands of others were subjected to, and a couple of other things. with some amazing high-end government officials and professionals that talk in that video. Highly recommend watching that documentary. I'm actually going to link it in the description of this video. I will link that documentary down there so people can watch it. I don't agree with everything that Dr. Gary Knoll talks about on the outside of this documentary with certain things, but this documentary nails it. It is excellent when it comes to the information and the various topics and aspects of Gulf War syndrome and toxic exposure injuries that we're dealing with today. And this goes for Desert Storm, Desert Shield veterans as well, because they've had a hell of a battle with it. And let's not even talk, you know, not even to mention Vietnam veterans and Agent Orange and everything else that they've had to deal with. You know, we need to ramp up that coverage, and we need to ramp up options both in the VA and in private health care, to be able to come to solutions, treatments, and further ways to cure or in some way solve these problems better for veterans dealing with all these different toxic exposure injuries. I can't stress that enough. This is part of why in some videos you see me quite bloated in the stomach. I put on a little winter weight, which, you know, that's typical for up in my neck of the woods being so cold and everything, but there are days where I am just super bloated because of my toxic exposure injury, and how it affects my digestive system and stuff. Sometimes I still get pain around my gallbladder, and I'll get fluid around it sometimes, but not to the extent where I'm having to go to the freaking hospital. They almost removed my gallbladder because it was so bad. Apart from everything else that they've done, I may end up still having to have that taken out at some point. But cutting out organs is not the solution to a problem that should have been addressed, you know, decades ago, but needs to be addressed more adequately, more comprehensively, and with all hands on deck and no expense. You know, no limit of expense. This is, I can't, you know, I had put in a video up about this a long time ago, but I had taken it down. I wasn't happy with it, and I was just not in the best headspace at that very moment to talk about it, because I was mad. Being able to talk about it with a clear head, obviously this is people's lives at stake. Literal lives that are at stake. You know, people are dying, veterans are dying every day, and some of it is because of these causes, these exposures and everything else, and not having a cure for them. So that's on the VA and a lot of politicians and stuff too. Yeah, that's really the video here. Just kind of some talking about this stuff and kind of explanations about stuff, and why the PACT Act needs to do better, be better, why the VA needs to do better, why private healthcare needs to do better, why politicians need to do better, and the veteran community as a whole needs to help each other and do better. And the military needs to do better. And it cut off. So it'll be the one edit putting these two videos together. So yeah, that's how it needs to be. All hands on deck. And everybody involved that allowed these toxic exposures, especially on the medical side and with these substances and everything else, apart from some other toxic exposures that could have been avoided, water contamination, things like that. Everybody involved, those politicians, senior military leadership and all that, need to be held accountable. Accountability. You know, will they ever see prison? Probably not. Can they own up to it and verify these things so that people can actually get proper care and not die? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's the video here. It's been a hell of a ride, but a lot of us are still here and we're not quitting. We're not giving up. We need to help find solutions for this. So that's what people need to do. Yeah. Pretty jacked up, isn't it? Yeah. I know. Alright, well, on to the next one. More good stuff coming soon. Again, if you're a veteran, you have a toxic exposure injury, or you suspect that you have one, or you haven't gotten adequate treatment and you know you have one, or whatever it is, leave a comment. Contact your VA people, contact your representatives, whatever it is. I hope some representatives see this. You know, Eli Crane, you're not even a rep for me. I don't even live in your state, but if you see this, or if anybody else sees this and understands what's going on, do something about it. You know, we need voices like that. The veteran community needs voices like that, apart from us putting out videos and talking about it. You know, we're voices, but we need voices that are going to help pull the trigger on things. You know, push that button, get stuff going. Yeah, that's really all I have otherwise. So, yeah. Again, you know, leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts, I guess. You know, as always, don't be a dick in the chat. You know, in the comments, whatever. But yeah, it's just, we just need to get this going. And the PACT Act needs to do better. The government obviously needs to do better. The VA needs to do better. Everyone needs to do better. And that's what we're pushing for every day. Every time we go to the VA and ask them to help and to fix things. And it goes for you too, DOD. Yeah, there it is. That's the video here. So a lot to think about. Again, link is going to be in the description for that documentary. I'm also going to put a link in the description for the RISC, the War-Related Illness and Injury Study Center, for veterans who need it and need to push their care providers to recommend them to get out there for these tests, for evidence, proof. Because I know a lot of veterans get their medical records sanitized by the military, or the military doesn't put things in there. They pull a lot of what's called CYA, cover your ass. They put a lot of that in there because they know what's going on, but then they cover it up. It's just a matter of fact. Links will be in the description. Yeah, let's get after it. All right, more stuff coming soon. Metal up. Out.